Thank you. Good afternoon. You'd think by now we would get the hang of this. Good afternoon. Thank you. So we made a change a few years ago where we brought the annual business meeting to the lunch session to ensure that we had a robust turnout for the ever exciting meeting. But the trade-off was that we promised to keep the business part of the meetings very short, and I will live up to that pledge today. In fact, my president's report will be on the brief side. I'd like to start by announcing the election results, and it pains me to say, in fact, I'm asking for a recount, but Walt Jacobs has, in fact, been elected president-elect. Congratulations, Walt. I'm also pleased to announce that elected to new 3-year terms are Kyoko Amano, if you would stand, and Dolores Guerrero, and Beth Caveron, and John Kiss. Also elected to a 1-year completion term while Walt moves on to his position is John Pratt. I'm also going to give a very brief financial update. We are in good shape. In fact, to say something on a serious note for a moment, we actually will end this year essentially net zero, which is remarkable given all of the challenges that we've had, and that's a testament to Dolores in her role as treasurer over here and Amber's work as well. But we really do end the year in good shape, and we have great prospects moving forward. There are 2 documents in Hoover that will show you our financial status if you want to take a look at them, and we can certainly address any questions you might have about the budget later on. But right now, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Amber Cox for her Executive Director's report.
Hello, everyone. This is the time where I get to share with you some updates about things like the memberships and the workshops and the regular goings-on of the office. And so I'm pleased to let you know that despite the challenges of the pandemic, we are maintaining our average of about 95% membership renewal. That means we are close to 500 member institutions. Each year, 5 or 10 join, and 5 or 10 also move on to other organizations or don't renew that year. But it's a very low turnover rate for us and for really any nonprofit organization. So that tells us that the members are still valuing the programs and the services that we do. Services like the chairs seminars and the seminars for new deans. We have offered the past 6 chairs workshops in a virtual format. I'm happy to let you know that we plan to go back to having a live format for the chairs seminars in 2022, but also keeping the virtual format because we have found that they do attract different audiences and different price points, and so that's something that's coming out of the pandemic as a new resource that we can keep. We will also be back with the new the seminar for new deans this summer in Toronto. So those 2 seminars will be live in July in Toronto. You will see registration information about that at the first of the year. The next thing I will tell you about is that we've referenced a couple of times we're going to be starting our strategic planning process. This time next year, we will be sharing with you our new 5-year strategic plan. So between now and then, we will really be looking to you for some input and guidance on where you would like to see the organization continue and change and grow in the coming years. So if you're interested in participating in that process, there's a volunteer form in your Hoover app, and I will be, of course, sending out emails this fall inviting you to participate in the planning committee, in conference calls perhaps, or focus groups. And also, that's a great opportunity if you're interested in volunteering as a future board member or in facilitation of the virtual or the in-person workshops. So again, it's been a really great year. We've done a lot of virtual, and we're excited to continue some virtual. We're going to continue the discussions for deans that we've been doing in the afternoons, and we're going to bring back some of the in-person programming. So thank you very much.
At this time, I would like to acknowledge that one of our board members is serving in her final year on the board. Terry Lee has served as president. She's currently serving as past president, and she'll be moving off the board at the end of this meeting, in fact. And so, Terry, if you could come up real quick, we have something for you.
But I'm not leaving the organization.
I'm sure most of you know that the positions on the board rotate from president-elect to president to past president. And those that were with us last year during our virtual meeting, you saw that we had to make up a lot of our business on the fly. And we started a new tradition of the virtual gavel. Terry passed the gavel to me from her screen to my screen, and now it gives me great pleasure and great relief to pass the gavel to Luis Falcone, your new president.
We had to put some pressure on Jonathan to have a peaceful transfer of power.
Fake news.
In fact, he said something about having a leaky roof in his suite, so we still don't believe it. Anyhow, thank you. I'm delighted to assume the role of president for CCAS for the coming year. My task now is to introduce the president for past president for his presidential address. Jonathan is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of New England. He holds a PhD in communications from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, the other flagship, we call it, in Massachusetts. His areas of expertise are communication studies and conflict resolution, which comes very handy in his work as a dean. I think every dean should be trained in conflict resolution. He brings more than a decade of higher education administration experience to his role as dean, and he's also been the past president of the New Jersey Communication Association and a member of the editorial board of the Atlantic Journal of Communication. His research on conflict resolution has been published in a large number of journals. Jonathan was named to the Princeton Review's Best 300 Professors, has a passion for teaching a wide array of communication courses, and a class on the social impact of rock and roll. I did not know that. When he's not busy in his role as a dean, you can find Jonathan climbing mountains or on the ski slopes in New England. Jonathan.
I guess we reverse the order, because I guess it's now the past president's address as opposed to the president's address, but that's okay. My table mates told me that I should do away with my script and just wing it and speak off the cuff. As much as I would like to, you'll forgive me for not doing that this afternoon. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I might not be kind. I began reflecting on this moment shortly after being named president-elect in 2019. I knew this time would come when I would be expected to address you all, and I started to wonder, what on earth could I possibly say to a room full of deans? This is by far the most accomplished and impressive group with which I am affiliated, and to be candid, it's quite intimidating. Even more candidly, I found it difficult to settle on a theme for this talk. Should I be serious, replete with intellectual gravitas, or should I try to be clever and humorous? And what was the likelihood that I would succeed at either approach? I also had to contemplate the ever-changing situation in which we find ourselves. What kind of message would be most fitting as we return to an in-person meeting in the midst of a pandemic hosted by a city struggling to regain its footing? I was struck by how much pressure was beginning to build, and I haven't even written a word yet. And then I wondered, would you even be listening? Or would you be compelled to discreetly check your email on your cell phones in an effort to extinguish some fire burning out of control on your campuses? Well, thanks to Amber, we have the fire part figured out. Everybody got their, did anybody not get their fire extinguishers? I'm happy to toss them. I got one more. Oh, wait, no, I've got one. And there are more floating around somewhere, so we'll get you your fire extinguishers. All of this questioning and self-doubt led me to reflect on my own career path. Do you remember Admiral James Stockdale in his 1992 presidential debate? For once, his much parodied opening of, "Who am I? Why am I here?" doesn't seem so funny to me. In fact, my first draft of these remarks was emerging to be a narrative version of that very reflective process. However, while reviewing and revising my work, I had a stark realization. What I was planning to share with you as a story of serendipity and good fortune was actually evolving into sound like a story of privilege. I froze. How much of my own career has been made possible by my own privilege and fortuitous circumstance? I was paralyzed in my thinking, and I stopped writing for a long time. How could I possibly move forward with these remarks once I contemplated them through that lens? And I began to question the value of sharing anything of my experiences with you. But if there's one thing we've all learned over the past year and a half, it's how to pivot. My lived experience being what it is, and my hours of president of this organization quickly coming to a close, I concluded that I certainly have the standing to share with you some things that I have learned about higher education leadership. After all, doesn't a dean qualify to do so? I'm going to go out on a limb and presume that parts of my journey are more similar to, rather than different from, your own. As such, I hope that my narrative of uncertainty and unanticipated detours resonates. To begin, most deans never aspired to be a dean. At least most of the deans I know, which mostly means deans of arts and sciences, who belong to CCAS and who come to these meetings. So, how many of you ever listed being a dean as one of your career aspirational goals? And for those of you that really did, when did that goal first materialize? Another way of asking the question, when did you first become aware of what a dean does? And when did that appeal to you? And why? In my 14th year as a faculty member in the Department of Communication and Journalism at Rider University, my chair was diagnosed with cancer. He was the founding department chair and thus the only chair the department ever had up to that point. He also was a dear friend. He had hired and mentored all of us, 15 full-time faculty members and a fairly large staff. To honor his leadership and legacy, we decided that we would have an election for the next chair. The intent was to create a spirit of positivity and aspiration, as opposed to framing it as no one wanting to take on the role. And as I had been fully promoted by then, I felt a sense of duty and obligation to put my hat into the ring to succeed him. And to my complete and utter surprise, I won by a single vote. To be clear, I had no idea how to be a chair or what a chair actually did. And you will find this to be a recurring theme in my remarks. In hindsight, I wish I had been aware of the CCAS chair's workshops, as I certainly would have benefited from attending one. But not wanting to bother my predecessor during his treatment, I leaned heavily on my professional assistant and did a lot of winging it in the first year of what was a 3-year term. I think that year 1 of a 3-year term is learning the job, year 2 is doing the job, and year 3 is deciding if you want to take on a second 3-year term. Things had evolved well enough for me that in the middle of my second term, I was asked to serve as interim associate dean. My dean had announced that he was retiring, and the associate dean was asked to serve as interim dean, so I was asked to serve as associate dean while still being department chair. Sound familiar? When the internal candidate was passed over for an external hire, she, the new dean, asked me if I would stay on for a second year as her associate dean in support of her transition. Not only did she become an important mentor and friend, she also introduced me to the world of higher education administrative leadership and CCAS. Sometime during the course of that first year together, she said to me, "You will be a dean one day." I thought she was nuts. 7 years later, she proved to be right. But until working with her, I had never thought much about the role and thus had no aspirations to be a dean myself. It was similar to when I entered college as a 17-year-old, and I had no aspirations whatsoever. Fittingly, I enrolled as an undecided, undeclared first-year student. I was an institutional double negative. In fact, I did not declare a major until I was told that I couldn't participate in an exchange program until I had one. As a sophomore, I was fortunate to study at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, as a communication major. I chose the major largely because of a book that I was reading at the time. There it is. The book was How Real is Real by Paul Václavic. The cover alone, an Escher drawing, had me hooked. The sense of interdependency, of mutual influence, and of balance had a big impact on me, and it still does as the drawing hangs in my office today. And to prove I am not so shallow as to judge a book by its cover alone, I also loved the subtitle. Confusion, Disinformation, Communication, an anecdotal introduction to communications theory. That was enough for me. If I had to declare one, I would be a communication major. In the foreword to the book, Václavic writes, quote, his goal is to explain how different views of reality arise and what human conflicts are about. Approximately 7 years after reading that for the first time, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on a social constructionist approach to conflict resolution. Go figure. Looking back on this part of my story from my current vantage, I'm struck by how little advising I received. There's a good chance I would not have declared my communication major had I not been reading that book at that time or completing my application for the UNC exchange program. Today, we take a much more intentional and deliberative approach to advising and mentoring undergraduates, but not so much for would-be deans. It is striking how little is said about deaning until one becomes a dean. In my more than 30 years in higher education, I can count on one hand the number of faculty who have approached me with an interest in becoming a dean one day. We certainly can do a better job at identifying and nurturing future deans. And this leads me to my second point. The academy at large is not fully vested in developing clickers that work. No, there it is. The academy at large is not fully vested in developing administrative leaders. Think about the disciplinary meetings you still attend, if you do attend them. Is there ever a session there for department chairs, for associate deans, or for deans? Or better, is there a session for aspiring administrative leaders, if such a population even exists? If you are of my generation, and we heard some of this from Kathy's remarks yesterday, but if you're of my generation, you had very little in the way of pedagogical instruction as part of your graduate work. In my case, I was invited to be a TA, which I took literally to mean teacher's assistant, emphasis on assistant. What I found instead was that I would be the teacher of record, with no training whatsoever. While the textbook had been pre-selected, the rest essentially was up to me. How do you write a syllabus? How much do you prepare for a single class meeting? What do I do when a student asks a question and I don't know the answer? How do you grade an essay exam? How do you write exam questions? Luckily, at the time, I didn't have to contend with SLOs and assessment. Like many of you, I learned firsthand that the PhD is not a teaching degree. And similarly, and my point here is that nor is the PhD a leadership degree, in that it fails to effectively prepare candidates for a life in the academy. Namely, it does not prepare faculty for the likelihood that one day they may be elected, chosen, or appointed to the role of department chair. As a quick aside, with all of the discussion of reorganizations within colleges of arts and sciences, I hear less and less about department chairs and more about unit heads and other titles. I think we need to rename our workshops. But regardless of the title, the chair plays a critical role in the workings of our colleges and in our systems of shared governance. I believe deeply in shared governance, and I believe that shared responsibility is a necessary component of effective shared governance. In many ways, I found the job as chair to be much more difficult than my job as dean. Not only does the chair straddle the worlds of the faculty and the administration, but it also can be more exhausting. As chair, I rarely had the luxury to leave the tangles of the unit. The department was ever present, and I always seemed to be in the weeds. Still, it is critically important work that is not always appreciated by the faculty at large, let alone the administration. Consider the different response the department chair receives from outside the academy compared to inside. When members of the community at large meet an academic chair, they often presume the individual is the smartest, the most widely published, or perhaps the most senior member of the department. As such, they are likely to be impressed by the title and to offer congratulations when one is new to the position. On the other hand, in our campus communities, we often respond to the news of a new chair being named by offering condolences. We need to shift this narrative. Ideally, we find the means to make leadership positions aspirational. And this is particularly challenging at the moment, though, truth be told, it never has been easy. And that is why we need to take seriously the work of preparing leaders within the academy. When we struggle to find department chairs, we must impress upon our faculty colleagues the importance of leadership development so when the time comes, candidates will understand the importance of the work, be prepared for the work that comes with it, and accept the responsibility in the spirit of shared governance. I have started to incorporate these conversations into the recruitment process. When we hire, when we interview faculty candidates, I talk about both shared governance and shared responsibility, and I begin the conversation from day one about the likelihood of taking on a term as department chair and the process by which that happens. This next part sounds crazy, but I mean it. We also need to encourage chairs to embrace their leadership roles. Seriously, we need to make sure that our promotion criteria reflect the importance of their time and energy. We need to do our best to support our chairs in their work. We need to equip them with the resources to do their jobs efficiently and effectively, and in short, we need to advocate for them. And for those faculty who take on the role of chair begrudgingly, we need to convince them to keep their disposition to themselves. That is, they need to at least give the appearance of enjoying the job. How else will they find someone to take on the role at the end of their term? Of course, I'm reminded of Tom Sawyer's fence painting lesson in motivation. Things get more complicated with leadership at the associate dean level. At least they did for me. After serving as associate dean for a number of years, it occurred to me that in order for me to be a dean myself, I would have to wait for my mentor to either retire or get fired. Otherwise, I would have to leave the institution, something I had never really contemplated. And for a whole host of reasons, going back to the faculty was not an option for me. In the end, she retired. I was appointed as her replacement, and then after 30 years, I ended up leaving the university for my current position at UNE. But the point is, for most faculty, the role of associate dean is not a career position. When we appoint associate deans or when we accept associate dean appointments, we need to have explicit conversations about professional trajectories and career paths. While most department chairs have well-defined exit strategies, things can be much more nuanced and nebulous for associate deans. And it is our job to make sure those conversations take place at the front end. It is critical for transparent and ethical leadership development. And this is just another example of a skill that we deans are supposed to have developed by osmosis. After all, deans are supposed to be good at having difficult conversations. Which is ironic, as I have learned that many deans, I just learned this from Charlene as well, myself included, that we're best described as highly functional introverts who suffer, this next part is me, not Charlene, who suffer to varying degrees from imposter syndrome. And this is my third point. Now, you are free to push back and disagree with me. After all, my data are purely anecdotal, though I've had enough conversations with enough of you to know that I do not stand alone. I remember my first CCAS meeting in New Orleans. It was 2010, I think. If anybody was there, you can, was it 2010 in New Orleans? I was supposed to attend the year before in Baltimore, but I came down with the swine flu. Do you remember that pandemic? Anyway, the first meeting was a remarkable experience. It was the first professional meeting I ever attended where every session was actually relevant. Whether the topic was retention or budgeting or strategic planning or faculty recruitment, I was learning at every turn. By comparison, I remember being at disciplinary meetings where I would struggle to find presentations that had any resonance whatsoever with my own work. The CCAS meeting in New Orleans was paradoxically overwhelming and intimidating while still being welcoming and supportive. And just as my first few years as associate dean gave me absolutely no sense that I ever would be a dean myself one day, I never would have believed in 2010 that one day I would be the president of this tremendous organization. But here I am, humbled beyond words and filled with deep and genuine appreciation. What sets CCAS apart, in my estimation, is the mutual support that permeates our work. If you think about it, we are each other's competitors. We compete for students, we compete for faculty, we compete for resources, and we even sometimes compete for jobs. Yet we share openly because it is the right thing to do. As the heart and soul of the Academy, we know that the better we do our jobs, the better the higher education landscape is for all of us. That is, the arts and sciences are greater than any one of our own campuses. The resources, the insight, the wisdom we share with each other truly does empower deans to lead. We also share in the realization that we never were trained to do our jobs, hence the imposter syndrome, at least for me. So we support each other and we share what we learn. And in that spirit, I'd like to share one more thing with you. Many of our campuses still code students as undecided, undeclared, that institutional double negative. Please stop doing so. I offer you an initiative that I have now implemented twice with great success. Brand your program for new students who choose to enter college prior to declaring a major. And then go a step further and encourage prospective students to come to your campus without a major declared. At UNE, we created the GUST program, Guided Undergraduate Studies. We are the Nor'easters as our mascot, so GUST fits well. There are three fundamental reasons why I would urge you to think about doing something like this. First, most students truly don't know what they want to study. Most aren't even aware of the full array of programs that we offer. They're beginning the college searches earlier and earlier, often by the sophomore year of high school, so they haven't even yet been exposed to the full scope of the K-12 curriculum, let alone the vast array of our catalogs. We do much better by meeting students where they are, unsure, but don't refer to them in the negative. Brand your program and then invest in it. Second, I believe the undergraduate major matters less today than it ever did before. Most employers don't care about the discipline of the bachelor's degree, and the same is true of most graduate and professional degrees. Of course, students must take the necessary prerequisites, but the major itself doesn't matter. Why is it then, when students arrive on campus, the very first question we ask them is, what's your major? And when we invite prospective students to campus, the first thing we do is divide them into cohorts based on what they think they're going to study. Why are we so determined to make students choose so quickly? Those students who truly are not ready to declare a major are inadvertently made to feel as though they are the only ones who don't have the rest of their lives mapped out, even though we all know that that's not the case. We do students well to normalize the decision to explore the curriculum itself for eventual pathways. Finally, our faculty and staff are uniquely positioned to assist students in declaring those majors. Over a third of undergraduates change their majors between matriculation and graduation. Rather than arriving with a major, most students would be better served by taking advantage of campus resources in exploring their options. For example, build an advising model into your program for undeclared students, and then consider having a designated section of your FYS or some other first-year course where the instructor can also serve as their academic advisor. If we wait until students are ready to declare a major, they will be less likely to change their major along the way. How many students arrive on campus with a clear sense of what they want to do, only to struggle in that first semester, left with a feeling of failure? Maybe they don't like the subject as much as they had anticipated. Maybe they're not as good at it as they had hoped. Or maybe they're surprised to discover an interest in a subject that up to that point had never really registered as a possibility. Now, imagine I'm a professor in communication, and imagine I'm teaching an introductory communication course. Imagine further, a first-year student in my class comes to meet me in my office hours after failing the second exam. She arrives at my office to tell me that she is considering withdrawing from the course. What is my response? Her esteemed professor with 3 degrees in communication. Stick with it. It gets better from here. You're going to love the upper-level courses. Communication is such a great major. And those could be among the worst things that I could possibly say to her. What I really should do is ask her questions. Are there other subjects you're finding more interesting? In what classes are you doing your best work? What did you hope to be learning in this class? And how did you choose your major in the first place? If we normalize exploring majors after students arrive, advising can take on a much more productive and likely helpful tone. I love to tell new students the best decision you can make is to be undecided. On my campus, GUST represented this year the third largest cohort of incoming students. Just let me know if you have any questions about this program. I love to talk about a familiar topic with familiar friends, the introvert that I am. As I look out among the tables in this room, I see a number of familiar faces and even more that I have not yet had the pleasure to meet. I see reconnecting, reimagining, and recalibrating in action. Many of you have collaborated with me, mentored me, and supported me over the last 12 years. You have taught me, you have inspired me, you've made me laugh, and you've made me feel as though I have something to offer, even if I doubted that myself at times. There are many in this room that I consider to be friends, and I thank you. For those newer to CCAS, especially my fellow introverts who may consider themselves inflicted with imposter syndrome, this is as safe as a group as you will ever find to get involved and to make a difference. Just reach out to anyone, join a committee, volunteer an idea. I promise you won't regret it. I still contemplate my future, and I wonder what I'll do next. I love being a dean, but I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge that I have applied for some provost positions in the past. By the way, UNE is looking for its next provost, so if you'd like to be my boss, just let me know. But before I wrap up, I have a few special thank yous. Traveling from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, I want to remind the new CCAS leadership team not to overlook the great state of Maine when planning future events. There's also a little bit of yeah, clap for Maine, absolutely. The slopes are open, by the way. There's also a little bit of an inside joke here, which means you won't get it, but you can laugh to be polite. Right, mine came in. First, Terry, as current past president or previous past president, whatever we say, I have followed in your footsteps over the last few years, and I could not have asked for a more conscientious, dedicated, and thoughtful role model. Can I throw it to you? Is that okay? Excellent. You're welcome. I should be able to wing this part, but I can't do it. To Luis, the next president, thank you for bringing us all together during a time when most didn't think it possible. By organizing this year's meeting as a face-to-face event, you have confirmed the need we all have to network with each other in person. Thank you. And to Walt. Walt and I, we do well. We joined together. We joined the board together many years ago, so you'll have to forgive our back and forth banter a bit. But to Walt, I hope by acknowledging you, you won't kick me to the curb after next year when my tenure on the board runs out. And last and most seriously, to Amber for making all of this possible. As Terry and Luis will attest, and Walt, you soon will find out, that the only reason we are able to do what we do is because of Amber's unwavering professionalism, her never-ending creativity, and her savvy acumen. And I should add, her endless patience for putting up with us. So with that, I thank you. Enjoy the rest of the meeting. And please come up and say hello if you have a few moments at the end.
I guess you probably realize by now that there's some beef going between Walt and Jonathan, but we keep trying to work at improving the relationship. Jonathan, thank you for some inspiring remarks. Again, this has been a year of upheaval for the organization, change, the need to adjust to the the pandemic times, and Jonathan's leadership in getting us through this process has been incredibly helpful. Getting to know new board members without actually having met them in person, and having meetings that were engaging and keeping us on task during the process. We're really grateful to you for that. And finally, as is the tradition, I guess, in CCAS, we always lose the gavels. For some reason, they're left behind. The previous president doesn't want to give it up. There are dozens of gavels all over the country. So we decided that we will give a gavel to the outgoing president so that he actually has one. So with that, we conclude this part of the program. Please enjoy the activities this afternoon. Please remember, tomorrow morning we have sessions, and then we close with a session from 11:30 to 1, which will be in this room. And it will have a musical component to it to send you home with some cheer and excitement. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference.